No matter how you look at it, quarantine is definitely a deal breaker when it comes to traveling. What's the point of traveling to an exotic location if you're just going to be cooped up inside your hotel room for days, even weeks, on end? Might as well stay home, right? Sadly, in light of current events, most countries and destinations worldwide that have opened their borders to foreign visitors are still imposing on arrival quarantines. These quarantines may last anywhere from 7 to 21 days depending on which country you're visiting. But there are countries adopting a different approach, in a sense that no on-arrival quarantine measures are in place for visitors, provided that they have been tested negative for COVID-19 among other requirements. The following is a list of a few quarantine-free countries where you may opt to spend the remainder of this year's summer. Although Singapore's reciprocal Green Lane and air travel pass arrangements with a number of countries are indeed a piece of welcome news, most Asian countries are still under strict lockdown and international flights are barred from entering their borders. The following Asian countries are currently open or rescheduled to reopen while not having quarantine measures put in place upon arrival. The Maldives. The Maldives has reopened to tourists and vacationers. Upon arrival, inbound travelers will be granted a 30-day tourist visa and be exempted from having to self-isolate. Travelers will be expected to fill out a health declaration card and wear masks at all times for the duration of the flight. However, all non-tourist arrivals to the Maldives by air such as residents and returning students are required to self-isolate for 14 days. United Arab Emirates. In the case of Dubai, foreign tourists from certain countries are allowed entry with no on-arrival quarantine imposed should they are able to meet the necessary requirements. Among others, all arrivals must have a valid insurance policy and filled out a health declaration form prior to embarking. Health screenings will also be performed on all passengers, with mandatory quarantine imposed should they are tested positive for COVID-19. But be careful, quarantine requirements vary across the Emirates, so please check the requirements if you will land outside Dubai. There are also more countries worth visiting in Africa. Here are some of the tourist destinations in Mama Africa that not need to do quarantine after arrival. South Africa. Travelers arriving in South Africa must be in possession of a valid certificate of a negative COVID-19 test obtained not more than 72 hours before the date of travel. In the event of failure to submit a certificate as proof of a negative COVID-19 test, such traveler will be required to do an antigen test at his or her own cost, and if he or she tests positive to COVID-19, he or she will be required to quarantine at his or her own costs. However, be advised that travelers from high-risk countries traveling to South Africa for non-essential or tourism purposes will not be granted entry. Egypt. All international travelers arriving in Egypt, including Egyptian nationals, are required to present a negative PCR test certificate issued within the preceding 72 to 96 hours prior to departure. Those unable to produce said certificate will be tested on arrival. Should a traveler test positive, the Egyptian authorities are likely to them to self-isolate for up to 14 days in a separate room allocated for quarantine within their hotel. There are also some countries in the Americas you can visit. Mexico. Mexico is currently open for international tourism, meaning that travelers can fly to Mexico and visit select beaches, including the one in Los Cabos, with no mandatory quarantine period upon arrival. The Mexican government strongly advises locals and visitors to continue practicing COVID-19 preventive measures, which include social distancing and proper hand hygiene practices among others. Brazil. Brazil is currently open for international travelers and does not impose quarantine measures for arrivals. However, should travelers are tested positive for COVID-19, they will be subjected to a 14-day quarantine. Additionally, those exhibiting COVID-19 symptoms are recommended to self-quarantine for 15 days. United States. Those eligible to enter the country are recommended but not required to commit to a 14-day quarantine. Passengers older than 2 years of age must have a medical certificate with a negative coronavirus test result. The test must have been taken at most 3 days before departure from the first embarkation point. Also, passengers must complete a disclosure and attestation form prior to departure. With travel bubbles being pioneered in some locations, Europe is set to gradually open itself to travelers once again. But there are complicated border-related issues that may impede movements even between EU countries, but there are also some countries in Europe that are open now to welcome you. Turkey. All travelers arriving or transiting from the UK, South Africa, and Denmark will be required to serve a 14-day quarantine upon arrival. Travelers who have been in the UK within the last 10 days will be quarantined for 14 days on arrival in Turkey at locations selected by the local Turkish authorities. Travelers transiting Turkey from the UK, Denmark, or South Africa will be required onboarding to show a negative PCR test result taken within 72 hours of departure to Turkey. Other than the aforementioned, Turkey's international land, sea, and air borders are currently open. All travelers meeting Turkish immigration requirements are granted entry without quarantine regardless of nationalities provided that they have submitted a PCR test within 72 hours of boarding their flight. Although no quarantine measure is being imposed, travelers will be subjected to tests and screenings upon arrival. Should they test positive for the infection, travelers will be required to quarantine. Ukraine. Ukraine is accepting international tourists from September 2020. It classifies countries into red and green zones, depending on which travelers meet with testing and quarantine regulations. While no self-isolation is required for travelers from green zones, if you are traveling from red zones you can evade the mandatory 14-day quarantine by undertaking a COVID-19 test within 48 hours of your due arrival. Valid health insurance from any Ukrainian firm or a foreign company with a branch in Ukraine, as available on the official website, must be availed of before traveling. And always remember to carry your ID and masks when in Ukraine. Also, remember at the end of this video the regulations and countries mentioned in this video may change anytime. So please always check the regulations before traveling, and don't forget to like the video, and subscribe for more.